So now what we're going to talk about is the change in demand in this video. And to kind of keep you on track of where we're at, remember, we're still talking about how demand is affected. And so in the previous video, what we talked about was the change in quantity demanded. And that was movement along the curve from one point to the next. Talked about the law of demand. And then under that, we dug in deeper, talked about maximizing utility and then limited income. Well, another way that demand is affected if there's a change in overall demand. And I've mentioned this before at the beginning of the overview of demand. Change in quantity demand and movement along the curve. Well, a change of demand is going to be a shift of the entire curve. Either left or right. So it's going to shift all the points. So we got price here. We got quantity demanded. So let's say that we got this curve here. Well, what's going to happen if we shift this curve to the right, if it goes this way? Well, notice that for this price here on this curve, we got this quantity demanded. Let's call it Q1 for P1. Well, if we shift the curve, then notice that for that same price, the quantity demanded is going to go up. And so if we shift the entire curve right, that's basically equal to an increase in demand. Okay, and all those points for this specific price, the demand is going to go up. For this specific price here, the demand is going to go up, right? So if we shift that whole entire curve to the right, it's just an increase in overall demand. Versus if we go the other way, if we shift it to the left, then notice that this same price here, which is going to be here now, well, the quantity demanded is going to go down for that same price. So a shift to the left, if we shift that demand curve to the left, that's basically a decrease in demand. And so what we're going to talk about in this video is factors that cause this change in demand. Remember, change in quantity demanded, there was only one factor that caused it. It was the price. But change in demand, there's going to be multiple factors. So the first factor we'll talk about is a change in trends or tastes. That's going to affect that change in demand. And basically, a positive change in taste or trend is going to increase the demand for a certain good or service or a certain product, which makes intuitive sense. So it's going to shift that demand curve to the right. So a good example of this, a recent example, at least when I'm making this video right now, is the company Beyond Meat. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but as of now in the market, a lot of people have gotten behind these guys. The stock of this company has really shot up in this last year because what they do is they offer plant-based meat substitutes. And a lot of people in the market seem to be into that. And so what's happened was maybe a year ago, the demand curve for Beyond Meat's products was like this. Well, now that curve really shifted to the right. So for that same price that they're charging for their product a year ago, well, that same price now, more people are buying. Right? That quantity demanded went up. So that's an example, a recent example of a positive change in taste. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but as of now when I'm making this video, this company is a good example of a positive change in taste or a trend in the market that has caused an increase in demand of that product. Now, a negative change in taste would decrease demand. So maybe actually the opposite of Beyond Meat, maybe meat products, there's a decrease in demand for them because there's an increase in demand for this, but it's not as obvious. So a more obvious example was when MP3 players came out, for example, or when iPods started coming out. The demand for CDs went down because more music was able to be stored on a smaller device. You didn't have to carry multiple CDs where like 20 songs can fit on one CD. Now you had an MP3 player where more songs can fit on just that single device. So that was a negative change in taste for the CD part. So if their demand curve was here, well, when the iPod and the MP3 players came out, their demand curve shifted this way. So for that same price they were charging, they were getting this many sales, for example. Well, now for that same price, they're getting less sales, right? That demand, there was a decrease in demand, so it shifted the curve to the left. Now, the second factor we'll talk about is a change in income. And before getting into this, I want to make a note here that a change in income, it's different than when we talked about the income effect. Okay, the income effect was under change in quantity demanded, and it was a way to explain the law of demand, of why it comes about, of why when you decrease a price, the quantity demanded goes up, because the purchasing power of that limited income is going to go up. So when we talked about the income effect, remember when I gave examples, I kept that income the same. So remember I had like $100 and then $100 and then I had $50 shoes here and $25 shoes here. I kept that income the same, and I was just showing how a decrease in price can increase the quantity demanded. So I want to make a note that the income effect is different than a change in income. A change in income is actually taking that $100. What's going to happen when we change it to $150? Okay, so the income effect was a way to explain how we go from this point to this point. But a change in income, so if we go from $100 to $150, if we're talking about a normal good, which I'm going to get into soon, for most goods and services, a change in income, an increase in income is going to shift that curve to the right. So an income effect was used to explain this, right? Why a decrease in price increases the quantity demanded. While now we're going to talk about changing the income and how that's going to affect that demand. And the way it does for most goods is it's going to shift that curve to the right. And then a decrease in income for most goods is going to shift that curve to the left. Right? So just wanted to make that point quickly because sometimes students can get those two confused. Now, a change in income, it actually falls into two cases. So it depends whether you're looking at a normal good, which by the way is most goods in the market, or whether you're looking at an inferior good. Okay, so a normal good, most goods and services, if your income goes up, then the demand for those goods and services is going to go up. Meaning that the demand curve is going to shift to the right. Right? That's what an increase in demand means. Versus if the income goes down, if your income goes down, then maybe your demand for goods and services is going to go down, right? If your income all of a sudden goes down, let's say you lose your job and then you got to get another job that pays you less, you're going to have to change your lifestyle a little bit. The demand for certain goods and services that maybe you were buying before is going to decrease, right? So this would be a shift to the right. This would be a shift to the left. And remember, this is for normal goods, which is most goods in the market. Now, inferior goods is actually the opposite of this. So with an inferior good, if your income goes up, then the demand for an inferior good is actually going to go down. And if your income goes down, then the demand for an inferior good is going to go up. So an example of this, a common example that's used is processed food, or like canned goods, fast food. Let's say that you're starting a company, for example, and in the first year, you're not going to be making as much money starting this company, but you're going to have to be working a lot of hours. So when you get hungry, you got to get food quickly. You might be more inclined to consume processed food because it's cheaper and it's quicker to make. Okay, so we've all heard those stories of entrepreneurs living on like noodles the first year or first couple of years that they're starting a company. So that's an example of an inferior good. And then as the income goes up, right, as your company starts to succeed more, maybe you can drop the processed food and then start eating more normal food. So you might get like a meal prep service, for example, which is going to be higher quality food, which is good because it's going to give you more energy. It's going to increase your performance. But initially, you can't afford a meal prep service, so you're going to be inclined to eat more processed food. So that's an example of an inferior good and why the demand for it increases when your income is low. And then as your income starts to go up, the demand for that processed food goes down. But that could be on a case-by-case basis as well. So personally, I try to eat healthy, but I love processed food as well. So even if I became a billionaire, I would still eat McDonald's here and there. But yeah, that's a whole other story. So anyway, most cases, processed food, canned goods, fast food, that's an inferior good. Another common example is certain modes of transportation. Okay, so let's say that right now you take the bus or the subway to work and it takes you 1.5 hours. But let's say on that route, there's not a lot of traffic, so if you did have a car, it would only take you half hour. So maybe when you're starting at the job, your salary is not as high, so you want to try to save money, so you're going to take the bus, subway, and you're going to do that 1.5 hour commute. So as your income is lower, your demand for that good is higher. So the bus, subway is considered inferior good in this case. But as your income increases, you start to value your time more. So that hour you're going to save, you're going to value more. So you may be inclined to buy a car. Now, a bus and subway, depending on where you live, it's not always going to be an inferior good. So even if your income starts to increase, if you live in a city that has a lot of traffic, well, a bus and subway might always be faster than a car anyway. And so you may want to continue taking that bus and subway. So you got to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Not always going to be an inferior good, but in this case, it is that I just described. All right, so quick little review. Normal good, as income goes up, the demand goes up, so the curve gets shifted to the right. As income goes down, the demand goes down for normal goods, so curve shifts to the left. For an inferior good, as the income goes up, the demand goes down, so that curve is going to get shifted to the left. And then as the income goes down, the demand goes up, which is going to shift that curve to the right. Now, the third factor we'll look at is the population size or demographic. And so this you got to look at on a case-by-case basis. So let's say, for example, that you're looking at baby boomers. You're looking at that period of time when there was that baby boom. Well, when they were first born, when they were newborns, there was probably an increase in demand for baby products. So that demographic, that newborn demographic, that population size went up. Increase in demand for baby products when that baby boom started happening. But then as these newborns aged and maybe became older or elders, then there was an increase in demand for retirement homes, let's say. Okay, so it could also depend on the population size or the demographic that you are looking at. So you got to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but just in general, as the number of buyers in a market increase, then there's going to be an increase in demand for products and services in that market, right? Or if the number of buyers in a market decrease, then there's going to be a decrease in demand, which is going to shift the curve to the left. An increase in the curve shifts it to the right. A decrease is going to shift that entire demand curve to the left. Now, the fourth factor that we'll look at is the change in price of related goods. And this is actually split up into two cases as well. It depends if that related good is a substitute or a complement or a complementary good. Okay, now a substitute good is basically a competing product or good. Versus a complement, it's goods used together. So for example, a good example of this is gas in cars. At least as of now, when I'm making this video and cars are still running on gas. Right, so substitutes are competing goods, complements are goods that are used together. So what happens is that if a substitute good, if their substitute price goes up, then your demand is going to go up. Okay, so let's say that you're making the iPhone, you're Apple, and then you're competing with the Samsung Galaxy. Well, if Samsung, for some reason, decides to jack up their prices a lot, well, a lot of people are going to just start buying iPhones. So that demand is going to go up for the iPhone. So if a substitute price goes up, the demand for your product is going to go up. And then if the substitute price goes down, if that competing good, their price goes down, then the demand for your good is going to go down. Right? So demand increase, that would shift to the right. This demand decrease would shift to the left. So again, if we're looking at Apple's demand curve, if a question asks you what happens if the price of a Samsung Galaxy goes up, well, your demand curve, Apple's demand curve, is going to shift to the right, right? The demand's going to increase. Versus if the Galaxy goes down in price, then Apple's demand curve is going to shift to the left. There's going to be a decrease in demand. Right now, complementary goods or complement goods are the opposite of this. So if a complement price goes up, if gas prices go up, then the demand for cars is going to go down. Okay, and if gas prices go down, then the demand for cars is going to go up. So if you have a product or service and it's usually used in combination with another good, with a complementary good, if the price of that complementary good goes up, then the demand for your product is going to go down. So it's going to shift that curve to the left. Versus if the complementary price of that complementary good, if the price of that good goes down, then the demand for your product is going to go up, which is going to shift that curve to the right. So the price of related goods, two different cases, substitute versus complement. And then the fifth factor, the final one, is future expectations. That's going to change the demand curve, shift it left or right. And future expectations, we can actually break down into two different cases. We can have future expectations about the price of the good or service we're looking at. And we can actually have future expectations about our income as well. And so these are pretty intuitive. So if you feel like the price of the good or service is going to increase in the future, so expected future price increase, then what's going to happen now? What's going to happen to the demand now? Well, if you think that there's going to be a future price increase, then you want to buy the product now. And so there would be an increase in demand now. This is how a lot of bubbles start. So whether it's a housing market bubble or a stock bubble. So let's say that you feel like the prices of homes in a certain area, they're for sure going to increase in the future. Well, there's going to be an increase in demand for buying those homes now. And then vice versa. So if there's an expected future price decrease, then there's going to be a decrease in demand. So if you think that the housing prices are going to go down, then there's going to be a decrease in demand. There's going to be a lot of selling of homes going on. All right, so that's expectations about the price of a good or service in the future. Now, income, pretty intuitive as well. If there's a expected future income increase, if you're pretty confident that your income is going to increase, then for most goods and services, there's going to be an increase in demand. Housing, another good example. If you're pretty confident that your income is increasing, then you might feel more comfortable in buying a home and getting a big mortgage on it, for example, because you feel like you're going to be able to pay off that mortgage. You're more confident. Versus if you feel like the job market is shaky and you feel like there's a potential risk of you losing your job, so there's an expected future income decrease or the potential for one, well then you're not going to be buying as many goods or services. There's going to be a decrease in demand for most goods and services. Right? So future expectations can be broken down into two cases: expectations about the price of the good or service in the future and expectations about your income. And that's pretty much it for demand. So to do a quick little review of what we just went over in all the videos regarding demand, we talked about how demand is from the consumer's perspective, how much of a good or service a consumer is willing to consume. And then we talked about how demand, how it could be affected. Either there's a change in quantity demanded, which is movement along the demand curve, and there's only one factor that affects that, and that is the price of a good or service. And so the law of demand, if that price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. if the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. Inverse relationship. And then we dug in a little bit deeper of why that law of demand exists. And it was because a consumer is trying to maximize utility and they have limited income. So we talked about diminishing marginal utility here, and then under limited income, we talked about the income effect, substitution effect. And then a change in demand, instead of moving along the curve from point to point, we can take all the points and shift them right or left. So a shift right is an increase in demand, shift left is a decrease in demand. And shifting the entire curve, there was multiple factors. Here there was one factor, here there was multiple factors. We talked about change in trends or taste, change in income, population size or demographic. This could also be the size of the market or the number of buyers in a market. Change in price of related goods, and we split that up into substitutes and complements, and then future expectations on the price of a good or service and the future expectations of your income.